Hey guys, what's up? Matt here, and this is going to be the part 2 to the video I put out last week called Why You Should Learn Japanese from Anime. So if you haven't seen that yet, then make sure you go ahead and watch that one before this one, because in this video I'm going to be assuming that you already know all of the content from that one. So in this video, I'm just going to be diving a little bit more in depth with regards to the specifics of the language that's used in anime and talking about how it's not quite as unnatural as people normally say that it is, and also talk about some reasons why anime can actually make a pretty good resource to learn Japanese from. Okay, so to get started, let's talk about this idea that the language used in anime is so unnatural that it's not worth trying to learn from. Well, what do we really mean when we say that a certain type of language is unnatural? Well, what we mean is that it's not representative or reflective of the way that actual native speakers speak in real life when they're just having spontaneous conversations with one another. Well, under this definition, the Japanese that you're going to find in most forms of Japanese media, not limited to anime, are not going to be natural. So if we're talking about Japanese drama, for example, although perhaps on average the style of language used in a Japanese drama is going to be closer to real life than the type of language that you'll find in anime, still it's very hard to find a Japanese drama that has 100% natural dialogue. Most Japanese dramas that I've seen still have very contrived types of language, and characters say super corny things that people would never say in real life, and there's still just sentence structures and vocabulary words that are pretty much never used in actual conversations. And so ultimately, the language is still unnatural, albeit it might be a little bit less unnatural on average than anime is. But of course, this is going to depend on the specific drama. It's also going to depend on the specific anime, but I'm going to talk more about that in a bit. And this extends beyond Japanese drama. It's true for novels. Of course, the narration within novels is not anywhere close to the way that people speak in real life, but even the dialogue within novels is generally pretty far removed from the way that people speak in real life. Also, whether we're even talking about things like news broadcasts, right? The way that people speak in a news broadcast is not even close to the way that people speak in real life. There's these totally different intonation patterns, words are pronounced with different pitch accents, different vocabulary words are used and different structures are used. It's a completely different thing. And so ultimately, if your problem is that you shouldn't use anything unnatural to learn from, then this should apply to all forms of Japanese media. It shouldn't just be applied to anime. But generally, this isn't the case. I think anime kind of has this double standard applied to it, where there's a lot of people who, if you told them that you're learning Japanese from anime, they would kind of frown at you. But if you said that you were learning from Japanese dramas or from the news or from a novel, they wouldn't blink an eye. And so ultimately, I think people have to make up their mind. Is it okay to use Japanese that is unnatural? If so, then there should be no problem using anime. Or is it not okay to use Japanese that is unnatural because that's somehow going to permanently mess up your speech patterns and you're never going to be able to learn how to speak normally? Well, if this is the case, then you better also disapprove of people using the news and novels and J-dramas and even textbooks for their studying, because a lot of times when you actually look at most Japanese textbooks, the dialogues that they use to teach you vocabulary and grammar are completely contrived and unnatural and unrealistic. And so ultimately, I think that people have to make up their mind. Now, for me personally, like I explained in the last video, I think that it's completely fine to learn from quote-unquote unnatural sources, because ultimately the fundamentals of the language are going to be the same regardless of whatever specific domain we're talking about. And even if you learn the bulk of your Japanese from something like anime, as long as you then go on to listen to natural everyday speech, you'll quickly be able to figure out what's unnatural, what is natural, and shift your speaking style to match that of everyday real life Japanese people. So next, let's talk about some of the specifics of the Japanese that's used in anime. So the first thing to talk about is that there is a huge range of different anime out there, and the specific style of Japanese used is going to be different in every anime. Now, of course, there are many anime that do have very wacky and outlandish and unrealistic dialogue, but there are also a lot of anime series and anime movies out there that do have largely natural and realistic dialogue. Again, I just think this overarching idea that all anime is bad, you shouldn't learn Japanese from anime, it's so unnatural, is a little bit misguided. So yes, there are many anime series that have mostly realistic and natural dialogue, but of course, there are many series that have pretty unrealistic dialogue. But when we really look into what about the dialogue specifically is unrealistic, a lot of it is something that's called Yakuwarigo. So according to Wikipedia, Yakuwarigo is a style of language often used in works of fiction that conveys certain traits about its speaker, such as age, gender, and class. So basically, within anime and other forms of Japanese media, there are certain styles of speaking that are associated with certain character tropes. For example, there's a certain old man way of speaking within anime where the first person pronoun is washi and sentences are ended in ja.
この玉をわしから奪えばお主らの勝ちじゃ。
And in real life, I don't think very many old men actually speak like this, at least not in most places in Japan. But within anime and some other forms of Japanese media, for some reason, it's just a thing that this is how old men speak. And another example is the kind of ojo-sama way of speaking. So there's this other way of speaking where you say things like, ah, so desu wa, and ah, so kashira. And that style of speech is associated with being a girl who has had a very good upbringing and was someone who was raised within a high class part of society and things like this, and so they're kind of rich and spoiled. And again, in real life, no one really talks like that, even people who actually did have a very good upbringing. But within anime and other forms of Japanese media, it's just a thing that ojo-sama, or girls who have had a very good upbringing, speak in this style. So a lot of what's unnatural about anime dialogue is this Yakuwarigo, where there's a specific way of speaking that is associated with the main character trait of a given character, but is something that would never actually play out in real life. Now, the thing about Yakuwarigo is that even if you're not an anime fan, you probably still want to eventually learn it, and here's why. Yakuwarigo aren't just used in anime. They're also used, for example, in the Japanese subs and dubs of foreign films. They're also used within novels, and kind of to a cool effect where a lot of times during a longer conversation, the author won't actually explicitly say who is saying what in the conversation, but you're able to tell who's talking because each character will have a specific way of speaking that identifies them. And so that's actually a kind of cool feature of the Japanese language when you're talking about novels. And also every once in a while, you'll see an example of Yakuwarigo used in real life, because maybe just to bust out a joke, someone will say something in that old man style of speech or in that ojo-sama style of speech. And so you want to be able to understand those jokes whenever a Japanese person busts one of them out. And so, yeah, in general, even if you're not an anime fan, you probably want to know Yakuwarigo because it's something that all Japanese people know and something that does come up every now and again within Japanese society. And so if you do want to learn Yakuwarigo, watching anime is a really great way to do that, because not only is Yakuwarigo abundant within anime, but also because anime in general has visuals that make things very comprehensible, it makes it easy to understand what different certain styles of speech are associated with which character tropes. Because a lot of times, for example, if you have an old man, there'll be a very archetypal old man with a crooked back and a cane and a beard, and he will be the one who used that style of speech. Or with an ojo-sama, there'll be someone who's wearing a pink dress or has like funny hand gestures that help you realize, oh, she's supposed to be someone who's from a high class section of society and she speaks like this, therefore this style of speech is associated with that type of character. So you want to know Yakuwarigo, and anime is a really good way to learn that. But on a sort of meta level, another benefit of Yakuwarigo and getting comfortable with it is that it forces you to kind of cultivate this meta awareness of the fact that different styles of speech are appropriate for different contexts and different situations. And this is something that's very important to internalize in order to be a successful Japanese speaker, because although Yakuwarigo is not used in real life, there are still a bunch of different registers and style of speaking which you have to be able to keep apart and use in the appropriate situation. So for example, if you're ever going to have a part-time job in Japan, there's a specific type of language that you're going to use when you talk to customers. And that's going to be different than the specific type of language that you use if you ever work at a real Japanese company and you're talking to your boss. And both of those are going to be different than the type of language that you're going to use if you're working at a Japanese company and you're talking to a client from another company. And of course, all of those are going to be different than the way that you would talk to your friend, and they're going to be different than the way that you talk to a stranger on the street. And so in order to be a successful Japanese speaker, you have to be able to keep track of a bunch of different styles of speaking and keep track of which one is appropriate for which situations. And I think watching anime can help you get started cultivating this awareness, because it forces you to recognize that the meaning of a word or the meaning of a phrase is not all that matters. You also have to know what situations and what contexts that type of phrase is appropriate in. And again, this all kind of ties back to how watching anime is never going to ruin your Japanese or doom you to speak unnaturally, because actually through watching anime and getting comfortable with Yakuwarigo and really internalizing the fact that different characters, tropes, and people in different classes and different age groups that represent different personality types speak in a different way will force you to internalize that Japanese is not one thing. It's a bunch of different micro languages. And once you have this awareness, you're going to very quickly pick up on the fact that a lot of the types of language that is used in anime is not used in real life, and in real life situations, different types of language is used. So it's actually going to get you kind of a head start on cultivating this awareness of how context-dependent Japanese is. It's not going to just basically doom you into thinking that the way that people speak in anime is the way that people speak in real life. Okay, so to summarize what I've talked about so far, if we're going to be strict, most forms of Japanese media are unnatural. So we shouldn't just have a double standard when looking at anime and single it out as the one form of Japanese media that you shouldn't learn from. Really, if you're that sensitive to unnatural speech, then you pretty much should throw out all Japanese media. But if we're going to even be more nuanced, well, we can't really just group things into Japanese drama or novel or anime, because ultimately the speech used in every work of art is going to be different. And so there are some Japanese dramas with realistic dialogue, other ones with unrealistic dialogue, some anime with realistic dialogue, other anime with unrealistic dialogue. And so again, when you really take a look at this kind of label, like, oh, don't learn from anime, it's really kind of lacking nuance. But then even when we dive into the most unnatural of unnatural speech, Yakuwarigo, actually, first of all, this is something that you want to know either way, because all Japanese people know it and it's relevant to Japanese society. So although it doesn't represent everyday speech, it is still something that you want to learn sooner or later. And second of all, through learning Yakuwarigo, it's actually going to help your brain notice at a very deep level how context-dependent Japanese really is. And this is going to carry right over to real life once you start listening to real-life Japanese and help you become accustomed to not just learning what things mean, but also paying attention to what context and what situation they're going to be most appropriate in. Okay, so now that we've dispelled most of the myths associated with anime Japanese, now let's talk about some of the reasons why anime is actually quite a good resource to learn Japanese from. So first of all, there's the whole thing related to Yakuwarigo that I just covered and the benefits associated with that. And also there's the benefit that I talked about in my previous video, where basically because the language learning process takes so long, if there's any sort of content in a foreign language that you're intrinsically extremely interested in and just passionate about, then in a way that is kind of your golden ticket to getting good at that language, because it's much easier to learn from something and to spend time with something if you're intrinsically interested in it than it is to try to just force yourself to learn from something that's really boring. Your brain is not going to cooperate if it doesn't want to be there. And so if you have a type of media that you're intrinsically interested in and that you can get excited about, that is really going to accelerate your language learning. On a related note, there's tons of anime to choose from. So if you kind of choose anime as one of the initial domains within Japanese that you want to focus on, well, you're probably not going to get bored very often, because there's anime from all different genres, all different styles, serious ones, goofy ones, dark ones, inspiring ones. And so that is just a huge benefit, because again, you have to spend so much time when you're learning a language that if you don't have enough content, that is going to be a real dire issue. On a similar note, there's a lot of anime where you can find the associated Japanese subtitles. And again, like I talked about in my last video, one of my most highly recommended ways of learning from a form of media in a foreign language is to be watching audiovisual content with matching target language subtitles, because that way you kind of get to practice your listening and your reading at the same time. And there's many other benefits that I'll probably talk about in a future video. And so again, there's a sheer abundance in terms of just how many series there are, how many different genres and styles there are, and how much content there is with Japanese subtitles is another huge plus that anime has going for it when we're talking about different types of media to learn Japanese from. Another thing that anime has going for it is that it's inherently very comprehensible. You know, in filmmaking, there's this principle, show, don't tell, but I think a lot of times in anime, they will just show and tell. And because of this, oftentimes anime gets made fun of for kind of over-explaining things. But as a language learner, this is actually very useful, because of course, when we first start watching things in a foreign language, we're not going to understand a lot of what's going on. And so anything that helps us understand is going to help us learn more quickly. Additionally, with many anime in particular, there's a lot of repeating tropes and a lot of predictable actions. There's the stereotypical isekai where the main character gets sent to another world, and there's those predictable harem animes where the main character is just an average guy, but for whatever reason, every girl seems to like him. And so once you start to pick up on these tropes, again, this is going to help you understand anime more, because you're going to be able to make very educated guesses as to what is being said, even if you're not hearing all of the words or following all of the grammar. And so this sort of, in a way, cliche tropes that repeatedly appear within anime actually are a benefit as a learner, because it's going to make it more comprehensible. And on a similar note, Many anime are ongoing series where you get to know the characters and then you're seeing those characters again and again, episode after episode, and there's a single plot that is slowly unfolding over the course of an entire season. And so once you get to know the characters and once you get a kind of hang of how the plot is unfolding and what everything in that show is about, well, again, all of that background information is going to help you make more educated predictions as to what is being said and what is happening within the story, and this in turn makes it more comprehensible, which then in turn helps you learn more quickly. Yet another thing that anime Japanese has going for it is that all of the voices are done by voice actors who speak in a kind of hyper-enunciated, extremely clear fashion, and this can be great for building up listening abilities as a beginner. Basically, as a beginner, when you first start trying to listen to natural unscripted speech, it's really going to be hard to understand anything, because in natural speech, people tend to speak very quickly and they tend to mumble a lot and a lot of sounds tend to be dropped, and so it can be difficult to recognize all of the words that you're learning. But when we're talking about anime, because each and every vowel is enunciated and the pitch accents are pronounced extremely clearly, it can be a really great training ground to help you become able to properly perceive all of the vowels, consonants, and pitch accent patterns, and through this, build up a foundation of listening ability. Now, the last main benefit of anime that I could think of is that because there is such a wide range of different anime out there, like I mentioned a little bit ago, there's always going to be some show that you can find that is on your level. So when you first start off, you're probably going to be watching things like slice of life shows or maybe even moe shows, because these tend to feature a pretty limited range of vocabulary, and also the types of situations that come up are pretty predictable, and this means that it's going to be more comprehensible. But then as you get better, you can start upgrading to shows like Steins Gate or Bakemonogatari, which are pretty difficult in terms of the language that's used, but as you continue to get better, eventually you can reach for those shows like Ghost in the Shell or Fate Zero, which are just wicked difficult when it comes to the Japanese that's being used. And I mean, with these shows in particular, I think that there's probably even many native speakers who struggle to really follow all of the dialogue. So within anime, not only is there a huge range of different genres and storytelling styles and art styles, and so you'll most likely be able to find lots of different shows that you're personally interested in, but there's also a huge range of the actual difficulty of the language itself, and this is very important for a language learner. So if you really like anime and you want to ride that wave as far as it can go, well, anime can take you all the way to the highest peaks available when it comes to vocabulary and grammar comprehension, because by the time you're watching shows like Fate Zero or Ghost in the Shell, you're going to be coming across lots of words that generally you'd only see in arcane novels, and probably most native speakers don't even know. So if you really do want to take it far, anime will be able to take you there, and by the time you're able to watch those shows I just mentioned, trust me, you'll be able to do the JLPT N1 in your sleep. So I think that those are pretty much all the points that I wanted to make in this video. Like I mentioned in the first video, I largely used anime as my path to becoming fluent in Japanese. This was also combined with reading a lot of light novels and then later on normal novels, but anime definitely played a huge role. Now, again, of course, if you do want to become able to speak like a normal person, you're going to have to eventually go beyond anime and listen to a lot of natural unscripted speech, but anime is definitely a great way to build a strong foundation if you're a fan of anime. So that's about it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you found this video useful, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, following me on Twitter, and also checking out the Mass Immersion Approach Patreon, where we have lots of exclusive content, including tens of hours of Q&A videos, a Discord community for people serious about learning languages through immersion, and also early releases of Anki add-ons that can help improve your study workflow. So that's about it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one.